Hi, I'm Kristiny,
And I'm Kirani.
and this is our presentation on the Yellow Wallpaper by Charlotte Perkins Gilman. Charlotte Perkins Gilman was born on July 3, 1860, to Mary and Frederick Perkins. Her father was largely absent throughout her life, and thus her primary caretaker was her mother, a woman who pushed strong discipline and repression on her daughter. Though Charlotte rebelled against this and grew into a strong-willed, independent young woman. This rebellion could be attributed to her lineage, as she is the grandniece of Harriet Beecher Stowe, who wrote Uncle Tom's Cabin, and Catherine Beecher, a women's rights advocate. As a young woman in her early 20s, Charlotte was an exceptionally active woman. She took part in clubs, fitness programs, language classes, and a variety of physical activities such as hiking, rowing, and sleighing. She regularly entertained friends, both male and female, and would often share intellectual discussions and nature walks with her closest friends. The closest of these friends was one Martha Luther, whose company Charlotte enjoyed immensely and whose loss of contact after her marriage was a source of great strife for Charlotte. It was after Martha's marriage and subsequent distancing from Charlotte that Charlotte met her husband, Charles Walter Stutson. It was some time before she would agree to marry him, however, as she had concerns about the loss of her independence as a married woman. Despite her misgivings, they married in 1884. Gilman would publish The Yellow Wallpaper in 1892, after 8 years of marriage and the birth of her daughter, and 2 years prior to her official divorce from Charles Walter Stutson.
So, a big part of the Yellow Wallpaper is mental illness, so we'll be talking specifically about mental illness in the late 1800s. So, the common label that was used, especially for women more than men, was hysteria. This word comes from the ancient Greek word for uterus. The symptoms of hysteria are very broad since it was a label that covered all mental illness rather than the specific labels that we have today. But the overall symptoms were things such as anxiety, irritability, and embarrassing or unusual behavior. An idea that people had about hysteria was created by the philosopher Plato, as he described the uterus as an animal that was roaming around the woman's body, and this would cause her to be irritable. So this made it where people were creating medicines that were to coax the uterus into returning to where it needed to be. And this kind of gives an insight about how mental illness wasn't an exception to how sexist society was and how they would gear things specifically towards women, even if it was a broad subject. So, an important figure to mental health that is named in the Yellow Wallpaper is Silas Weir Mitchell. Dr. Mitchell was a Philadelphia physician who developed the rest cure for neurasthenia in the 1870s. For anyone who doesn't know, neurasthenia is a term started in the 1800s for a mechanical weakness of the nerves. Dr. Mitchell experienced a fall in his reputation due to the portrayal of the rest cure in Charlotte's story. But some people still debate today whether he was unreasonable or not for prescribing such a strict rest cure. This is mainly due to whenever they found letters that had been exchanged between Charlotte Gilman and Silas Mitchell, it seemed that Charlotte was in a very bad place in her life and wished for an escape to that. And although there wasn't much that Dr. Mitchell could do, the rest cure was seen as something that could help her get out of that situation. So more about the rest cure in particular. It was used to treat nervous illnesses and frequently anorexia nervosa, which is a specific nervous illness. The rest cure typically lasted 6 to 8 weeks or so, and it involved isolation from your friends and family. This cure enforced bed rest and had a fatty, milk-based diet. Doctors would also use massages and electrotherapy in order to keep the muscles toned on the patient. And another aspect of the rest cure that is very important to Charlotte's story in particular is the prohibition of talking, reading, writing, and sewing. And through the Yellow Wallpaper, you can see that self-expression and writing was a really big thing to Charlotte. Dr. Mitchell believed that the rest cure would boost the patient's weight, increase blood supply, and remove them from any potentially toxic social circles. This was all good in writing, but not so much in practice. Women who were independent and outspoken, such as Charlotte and another writer named Virginia Woolf, were prescribed the rest cure, and it came to be thought of as a way for their wills to be broken and enforce the idea that a woman would truly be happy and healthy if she submitted to male authority.
Charlotte's mental illness began shortly after her marriage, when she began to experience discontent centering on her lack of ability to pursue her own career goals and intellectual pursuits, as she was instead charged with domestic tasks like housekeeping and child rearing. Her pregnancy took quite a bit out of her, and after the birth of her child, she experienced postpartum depression. The Yellow Wallpaper functions as a somewhat autobiographical retelling of the depression Gilman herself experienced, and acts as something of a call-out to both her husband and the doctor who treated her, one Silas Wire Mitchell, who is name-dropped within the short story as a possible doctor for the narrator by her husband. On her own mental illness, Gilman wrote, "I could not read nor write, nor paint nor sew, nor talk nor listen to talking, nor anything. I lay on that lounge and wept all day. The tears ran down into my ears on either side. I went to bed crying, woke in the night crying, sat on the edge of the bed in the morning and cried, from sheer continuous pain. I made a rag baby, hung it on a doorknob, and played with it. I would crawl into remote closets and under beds to hide from the grinding pressure of that profound distress." This persistent depression was not helped by Mitchell, who advised her to live as domestic a life as possible. Have your child with you all the time, and never touch pen, brush, or pencil as long as you live. Gilman, who had always had a profound love for self-expression and physical activity, blamed herself initially, feeling she had come up short in some way when she did not recover. But over time, she realized that self-expression and independence would be the most beneficial to her mental health, rather than the repression recommended to her by her doctor and husband. The short story is a direct criticism of Mitchell's methods for treating mental illness and presents a somewhat exaggerated scenario of what might happen to a woman whose mental illness is worsened by those methods. Despite the exaggeration, the story is still rooted in truth, as Gilman is writing about her own personal experiences. While the woman at the end of the story is behaving erratically, that sort of behavior is not entirely out of reach for individuals with severe mental illness, and thus the exaggeration is not exceptionally unrealistic. The Yellow Wallpaper is a story written to call out the injustices women faced and how attempts to treat mental illness can go horribly awry. Gilman suggests an approach that would not worsen said illness and goes in direct opposition to the most popular approach to treating hysteria in that time period.
And that was our presentation on the Yellow Wallpaper.